The goal today is to explore more of the north ascent ridge to La Madre Mountain and see if we can get to the summit of La Madre Mountain. Here's that north ascent ridge. On the horizon here, you can see how it circles around the right side, upper right side of Devil's Slide, that massive limestone slab, and then on up to the summit of La Madre Mountain, and then perhaps there's a route along the Eastern Ridgeline. There's Fernandez Peak. Getting around Fernandez Peak is going to be a big challenge. Down to the saddle, and there's East La Madre Peak, that long summit area. So just to see a larger view of that ridgeline, there it is. From La Madre Mountain on the right, and down past Fernandez Peak, down to the saddle. Now, the big challenge of today is to get up to this the La Madre northern approach ridge in the most streamlined way that's going to give us the most time to reach La Madre Peak. And here in the sunlight, nice marker. It marks the approximate point where I will summit, where I hope to summit that ridge. And then it continues on behind the sunlit ridge. It circles around, as I mentioned a little earlier. How did we get here? See the map on this page, but what we basically did, we are on a road that skirts the lower north side of the La Madre Ridgeline. It's the only road here, and it heads west toward that northern approach ridge. Okay, I hope that is clear. Look at the map. It'll be much more clear than my explanation, probably. And then just looking around, beautiful time of day. Looking down to the sheep range, over to what I call the Harris Springs Canyon Ridgeline with peak 6080 as its summit. And then back up this approach ridge, great approach ridge. Look at my page on LasVegasAreaTrails.com, East La Madre Peak. That's the approach ridge. There's the long peak. Okay, let's continue on up. We've got a lot of ground to cover. Hopefully we get up on this ridge line to where you see the sunlight with enough time to continue upward toward Devil's Slide and La Madre Mountain. Let's get moving. And by the way, we began at a parking area, trailhead parking area on Kyle Canyon Road, just above the horse ranches. Here we are at the end, the upper end of the entrance road at what I'd call the northeastern entrance to the La Madre Mountains Wilderness. And if you want to drive this road, you'll save a lot of time and energy over what I did on foot. And here you see, looking down the road, the only thing is you can't park where I parked because there's no vehicle access to this road from where I parked. What you need to do is look on the map and find where this road meets Kyle Canyon Road down further on Kyle Canyon Road, somewhere in the midst of the horse ranch area. Just check the map out, and if you can drive this, you'll save a lot of time and energy. So let's look around. Sun has not yet topped the ridge lines, so I've already pointed them out. I won't point them out again. See if you can remember. But one thing I will point out, just a moment. Yeah, there's a full circle, just so you can see how beautiful this area is. Beautiful and untouched. I've never seen anyone up here. So that says two things. One is you'll get a whole lot of solitude. Secondly, you better be prepared to get yourself in and out on your own power, because no one's going to be here to help you. Okay, so anyway, here we are. I'm going to trace the route a bit. Um, here's the vehicle barrier. Beyond this barrier, there's an old road that continues up this ridgeline. You see a little sunlight there. That's part of this approach ridge. And where we want to meet, here is the La Madre Mountain North Ridge. I've got a page on Las Vegas area trails where I approached that ridge from the wash below. Found a beautiful limestone slab just embedded with so many ancient 450 million year old fossils that there were multiple fossils per every few inches. Anyway, yeah, look at where the sun is lit right at the edge of this northern approach ridge. What we need to do is continue up this faint old road. It's going to eventually turn into a trail, and then we want to angle up to, you see this in the sunlight, you see a more gradual approach to the upper ridge line there. Once we reach the upper ridge line, it continues upward, circling around and above Devil's Slide up to the summit of La Madre Peak. Now, I don't know if we're going to get all the way up there, but we're going to give it a try. We're going to get further than we did last time. Anyway, that gives you an idea where we are and what our next goals are, which is the La Madre Mountain Northern Approach Ridge, and then see how far we can get up toward circling above Devil's Slide and then up to La Madre Mountain. No promises. It's a 4,000 foot elevation gain at least from my starting point. So by the time I get up there, I'm usually pretty much out of gas. But we'll see. we'll just see how far we get. Okay, as I mentioned, there's an old road that begins where the entrance sign for La Madre Mountains Wilderness um, was posted below. We have now ascended that old road. You can see it stretched ahead here, looking back. Okay, and so what is next? You see sunrise over the La Madre Ridgeline. Uh, okay, this road ends just beyond where I'm standing, and there's a little trail takes you down into the gully below. And what I want to do, you can see there's some intervening ridge lines. Our goal is to reach that upper North La Madre Mountain Northern Ridge Line. There it is. We want to get right up in that area. But you can see there are some low intervening ridges to cross. So let's see if that little trail might help us to cross those intervening ridges and then ultimately ascend up to this point, or if we need to just figure out our best route. From this high vantage point, you can see the terrain above, a lot of limestone there, vertical ridges. I did come down through this area earlier. That's how I descended from the ridge line. What I want to try to do is get over to the corner there, just below the limestone, circle around and see if there might be a nice ascent up to that upper ridge line there. And of course, looking around, here's the La Madre Eastern Ridgeline. East La Madre Peak and the saddle just below to the right. And then here's looking down the approach route. See if I can zoom in. You can see the sheep range below. See if I can zoom in on the road that I originally ascended. Yeah, there you go. You can see the road below. So, gives you an idea where we have arrived at so far. And also what's above us. This huge limestone ledge, and how we hope to ascend it by rounding the corner over here. We'll see how that all pans out, but yeah, we continue to make progress. As I mentioned, I've been skirting the base of these limestone ledges looking for an opening. Did not find a good opening, but here's that corner that was originally in the sunlight. And it looks like I could almost round this corner and walk up to the top of this ridge line, totally bypassing all these ledges. So what I'm going to do is once I get up there, if that's the case and it's that easy, I'm going to put a cairn up there so that you will know what point to descend, start your descent um, if you're coming from above. And then here we're looking at the Eastern La Madre Ridgeline over from Fernandez Peak over to the saddle between peak 6826 and on the right and East La Madre Peak on the left. And I've got an adventure that goes up to that saddle. Pretty cool adventure and route. Okay, and then looking around. Here you can see I skirted this, just the base of the ledges here. And on the way back, you want to find a way over to the descent ridge line that leads to the road below. Sheep range in the distance. Okay, so now let's see if my hope comes true that I can just walk to the top of this ridge line around the edge of these ledges. Here we go. Okay, the opening is right at the corner. This is the place that was in the sunlight that we saw originally from way down below on the roads. And, you know, I'm not sure I would go further around. We'll check it out from above, but I think that you want to go right up through this opening. You can see how, maybe it's a little um, dicey if you stay low and round more of the limestone here. So I'm going right up through this little passage. Let's see if that takes me up to the upper ridge line here. A very light class 3 move brought me up through this little channel. Class 3 because I had to use my hands. Couldn't just walk up. And up above, yes, it looks like we are just about on the upper ridge line. Let's continue along and see how that works out. I guess I could have continued around and then up, but I think this is actually the quickest, easiest way up the little class 3 channel that I took. So now we just need to weave around the rocks and the trees and the brush to get up to the upper ridge line, which is right up here ahead. I don't think there are any more ledges to speak of, no more class 3 moves. If there are, I'll make a note of it. And yeah, good view of Devil's Slide. And then to the left, La Madre Mountain above Devil's Slide. And then Fernandez. Okay, let's weave through this intervening distance to the summit of this ridgeline. Yes, it was pretty easy to walk up the rest of the the route up to where I'm standing here. Now I'm on the upper ridge line. I call this the La Madre Mountain North Ridgeline. And as promised, here's my little cairn. Not too spectacular, but if you're coming down this ridgeline, as I may eventually today, and you see this cairn, that's where you want to take a right and descend through the ledges so that you don't end up having to go over the edge of something, which you wouldn't do anyway. But now let's look around. And here on this ridge line, you can see Angel Peak in the Mount Charleston Wilderness, Mummy Mountain, Charleston Peak, and Harris Mountain on the right, Griffith Peak on the left. So you basically get a good view of the Mount Charleston Wilderness to the west. And you're on a nice approach ridge line. And I think the way we got here is pretty streamlined compared to any approach I've made so far. So now let's continue on up this ridge line, and it's going to wind around to the right side of Devil's Slide. There's going to be a pretty steep slope, and then we end up above Devil's Slide. If we make it that far, we'll see. And here's something else from this point. Pretty cool view right between these trees. In the foreground, the Harris Springs Canyon Ridgeline with peak 6080 as its high point. And immediately behind it, and just a little bit to the left, there's Gas Peak. Above the upper end of Decatur Boulevard in Las Vegas. And then over a little further to the left, the Sheep Range. So there's some cool views that open up. Plus, we're in a beautiful juniper and pine forest on what I call the La Madre Mountain North Ridgeline. Let's see how far we can ascend in the time we've got. And here, beautifully framed through these trees, is peak 6826 on the right, East La Madre Peak on the left, and the Eastern Saddle in between. Continuing up the La Madre Mountain North Ridgeline through this beautiful juniper and pine forest. And there you can see the ridgeline continuing upward, Devil's Slide, and above to the left, La Madre Mountain. So you can see how the ridgeline winds around. We're going to continue on up, see how far we get. And to look around, there's Fernandez Peak, and then going down to the saddle. And beyond that, the last peak is East La Madre Peak. So a unique perspective here. Let's look around over this way. See a lot of different descent routes we could take, but it'll probably go back the way we came, not sure. And there's a campground down below. Can't see it from here, but that is on the original North La Madre Peak approach that I took from Harris Springs Road. Speaking of which, there you can see, if I can nail it here, Kyle Canyon Road. And there's the Twilight Zone parking area. That's not too far above where we parked on Kyle Canyon Road. So now you can see a lot of the connections. Here's the ridge line I've been on, and somewhere in this area is the point at which I descended or ascended through the limestone ledges. So we'll see more as we continue to ascend. I want to get at least to this high point ahead. Puts me beyond where we arrived at before. Don't know if I can go much beyond that, simply because the days are shorter. We're only about 6 weeks away from the shortest day of the year. We're in November, second week in November. Devil's Slide. Notice the two sections. Lower is a lot of limestone scree that probably fell from above, and above is the magnificent limestone slab that is Devil's Slide. I'm at a high point now. I'm at my turnaround point, and just across from the magnificent Devil's Slide, there's a great view. And then La Madre Mountain to the left. And then looking over here now we can see Burnt Peak. And El Bastardo. And then looking further west on the La Madre Ridgeline. You can see, you can get close to the area where the La Madre Ridgeline meets up with the Wilson Ridgeline, that higher ridgeline on the horizon. Then we move over to the Mount Charleston Wilderness. Here's Griffith Peak. A little lower to the right is Harris Mountain. great, unique perspective here. We're going to try something really cool. But first, let me point out some things. There's Charleston Peak. And then to the right, Mummy Mountain. And just in front of Mummy's Toe is Fletcher Peak. There's Fletcher Peak, the forested, darker green peak in the foreground. Looks like a hill from here. And then behind it is Mummy's Toe. And by the way, at the base of Mummy's Toe is Rain Tree, the famous 3,000-year-old bristlecone pine on the North Loop Trail. Over to Mummy's Chin and Mummy's Nose. And then Angel Peak. Air Force radar installation. Okay, and here's a larger view of that swath we just looked at. Now let's go ahead and look in the other direction and then back down the north ridge of La Madre Mountain. We've just ascended that ridge, and then a little further over. Let me turn here. Not a really good place to stand. Okay. Yeah. Down here, you're looking at the Centennial Hills area, Metro Las Vegas. And then here is East La Madre Peak, Saddle, on up to Fernandez Peak. Peak, I think it's 70, 80 here. And then back to Devil's Slide and La Madre Mountain. So there you have it. This is where we are. Now we're going to try something really cool. We are going to descend this ridgeline that we're on. We're going to descend to the La Madre Mountains campground and then take the La Madre Mountain North Road down to Harris Springs Road, over down Harris Springs Road to that Twilight Zone parking area on Kyle Canyon Road, and then take a right and end up where we began. So this would be a huge loop, but I'll show you some of the connections here. And by the way, if you look on the linked website, LasVegasAreaTrails.com, on the La Madre Mountain North page, this is exactly where I sat when I ascended from the campground. And then you can see the route that I took up the next steep ridge line, over Devil's Slide up to the summit of La Madre Mountain. Before I can make an eastern loop, I'm pretty sure now that I'll need 14 hours of light at least. Yeah, and then there's also a La Madre Mountain, El Padre Mountain, Burnt Peak Loop, and then an El Bastardo and Burnt Peak Loop. So lots of additional adventures up to the west on the La Madre Mountains ridgeline. Okay, let's head back down to the campground. I'm going to abbreviate this part of the video where we circle around because you can find this whole route on the La Madre Mountain North Approach video, but just for this video here, we head down this ridge ahead. It's going to head down to around this point here and then angle down to the right and over to the La Madre Mountains campground, which is over in this area. And then the route angles around the left side of this hill. By then, we're on the La Madre, the North La Madre Mountains Road. That heads down to Harris Springs Road. We take a right on Harris Springs Road and then head back toward our starting point. So that gives you an idea of where we are and where we're headed. Let's do a quick check-in here. This is the ridge line I've been descending. I believe my high point was either up there, but more likely up here. Yes. So you can see the ridge line I've been descending. A lot of limestone ledges to overcome on the way down. There, by the way, is La Madre Mountain on the left, Burnt Peak, El Bastardo, Burnt Peak on the left, El Bastardo on the right. And then this descent ridge continues very nicely. I don't see the campground area yet, but we will at some point. We know that that hill right there is the hill that we circle on the left side heading down that North La Madre road from the campground. So the campground's down in this area somewhere. We'll find it. So there you have it. We'll check in a little later. Time to have a check-in here. This is the area we descended from. The ridgeline we've been descending. And you can actually see El Padre Mountain now. There's El Padre. Here's Burnt Peak. And you can see on LasVegasAreaTrails.com where we ascended La Madre Mountain and then over to El Padre and Burnt Peak. And Mount Charleston Wilderness. This is the ridge we're descending now. And I believe our target is the top of the road, the summit of the road below, which may be right there. So we'll descend this ridge for a bit and then cross over, hit the summit of that road, and then take the road around the left side of this large hill. circle around, meet Harris Springs Road, and then down to where Harris Springs and Kyle Canyon meet. There's Harris Springs Road meeting Kyle Canyon Road right at that point. There's the Twilight Zone parking area. And from there is just less than a mile walk down to where the Beast is parked and where we started. Okay, now it's a matter of descending this slope, ascending the slope across the way, and the upper end of the road, the North La Madre Road, is right in this area. Now I may angle over and catch it a little lower. I don't know. So we'll just see what things look like when we get closer. Okay, instead of crossing over to the road, I'm going to stay on this ridgeline, keep descending until it reaches the left side of this hill where the road should be. Let's see what happens. I've stumbled upon a dirt bike track with cairns. I'm going to follow this, assuming that they came from and are heading to the nearest road. Let's find out. This could streamline our progress. By the way, I just looked back and there's the La Madre Ridgeline in all its glory. La Madre Mountain with Devil's Slide. Then over to El Padre, over to Burnt Peak, and El Bastardo. So there you have it. Good, I turned around. And then over along that ridgeline to the Wilson Ridgeline. And there's Griffith Peak. And descending to the left is Sexton Ridgeline. Here is Harris Mountain. And descending from Harris Mountain toward us is the Wilson Ridgeline. That's the upper Wilson Ridgeline. Okay, let's continue on this little dirt bike trail. Sometimes it's fun to back engineer what you see. And I imagine I can picture a pickup truck with dirt bikes in the back and driving up North La Madre Road, camping at the campground, and then having a dirt bike excursion up from the campground. So yeah, here's the left side of that hill we've been shooting for. And the dirt bike would probably choose the path of least resistance and not be whipping around through the middle of brush, but going around. And so I've just taken that dirt bike path, and here we are. We're almost, I believe, at the campground. Let's continue on. And by the way, turning around, wow, look at this. What a shot of Devil's Slide and La Madre Mountain in really nice lighting. Look at that. And then down Peak 7080, Peak Fernandez Peak. Awesome. That's the Eastern La Madre Ridgeline. And here we are on the La Madre Wilderness North Road. That's just a matter of heading down to Harris Springs Road, taking a right and then heading back. So yeah, here's looking up that road, and the route that we took was definitely a streamlined route to get to this point. So we are basically in the campground area. I'll show a campsite if I see it, but let's head down the road. We got a lot of ground to cover before it gets dark. Continuing down the La Madre North Road. But as promised, here's a little campsite. Definitely have a four-wheel drive to get here. Bring everything you need. I guess somebody brought a dirt bike. I'm not sure they're supposed to drive those around the ridges above, but anyway, yeah, this is a beautiful campground. Imagine camping here under the stars. You've got the Mount Charleston Wilderness. Some of the sites above this point are have great views of the La Madre Wilderness and the Ridgeline. And here, looking up, here's the notch between La Madre and El Padre Mountains, and this going over and downward would take you to Brownstone Basin. And in addition, we earlier saw the eastern entrance sign to the La Madre Wilderness. The northern entrance sign is not too far above on this road, so we've basically hit both the northern and the eastern entrance today. Just had to get this shot looking back at the La Madre Ridgeline, and wow, what a view in this lighting. There's El Bastardo. It's on the western end of the ridgeline, or heading west. Burnt Peak, El Padre, the Notch, La Madre, and then down to the left starts the eastern La Madre Ridgeline, and there's Peak 7080. Okay, continuing down the La Madre North Road to Harris Springs Road. We're approaching Harris Springs Road now, where we take a right turn. We have descended the La Madre North Road. And here's looking around. Kyle Canyon Road is on the other side of that ridge line ahead. But we're going to head down Harris Springs Road and then connect with Kyle Canyon Road, and then down Kyle Canyon Road and connect with our starting point. Arrived at the intersection, or just before the intersection, of Harris Springs Road and Kyle Canyon Road. So down in the wash, I begin to cut across, and continuing along, I've got about 7/10 of a mile left, and you can see the large ridge line. Before we get to that ridge line, or that hill, the parking area where I started will be at the left base of that hill. And here we are back at the beast. At our starting point, in this adventure, we took in both the northeast and the north entrance of the La Madre Mountains wilderness. We were up close to the base of Devil's Slide. In fact, we were looking straight across at Devil's Slide. So we took the North Ridge up to that point and then circled around down to the La Madre North Campground and then back on the North Road and Harris Springs Road, and then a desert crossing here at the very end to arrive at our starting point on Kyle Canyon Road.